Hello, hello, and welcome to Difficult Conversations. I'm your host, Wilda Black. Today, we are going to continue our conversation on race and social justice in our schools. I would like to welcome back Mr. Shahid. Mr. Shahid, welcome to the show. And Collins, who are here for the first round of our discussion on racism and social injustice in our schools. Next, I will have two phenomenal women who will be joining us today in our discussion. First, I have Miss Kira Street. She is a graduate of MIT. She graduated with a master's. Miss Kira is a UI UX designer who is also passionate about design education with her multidisciplinary background in mechanical engineering, architecture, and product design. She seeks to design by valuing both functionality and delight. You may find her buried deep in Illustrator, designing graphics, coding an interface with coding an interface that generates crochet patterns or 3D desktop products. In addition to her creativity, um, she cre- to her creative works, she enjoys mentoring and teaching students about design and helping others on their career journey. Welcome, Miss Kira, to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Next, I have Miss Jael Kerandi, born in Kenya and moved to the States when she was 18 months old. She is the youngest of five children. Jael is a rising star senior at University of Minnesota, Carlson School of Management. She is majoring in finance and marketing with minors in leadership and business law. She is currently interning with Microsoft in the finance department. Jael is passionate about creating a better world for the future generation. She served as the first Black undergraduate student body president at the University of Minnesota. She currently serves as the ranking representative to the Board of Regents. She has a deep love for football, but enjoys watching almost all sports. She also enjoys babysitting, fitness, specifically weightlifting, and also baking. Fun facts about Jael. Jael doesn't use any alarms to wake up, and she's passionate about racial justice and ensuring that our institutions are held accountable. Jael chose to call for her university to sabotage after the murder of George Floyd, which happened 20 minutes from Twin City campus. It was important that as a representative of students, Jael spoke up. The university holds values in diversity and inclusion, and those values do not align with the murderous actions and history of the Minneapolis Police Department. Students who are paying tuition deserves better. Students needed to know that the university valued Black lives today and not tomorrow. Before we welcome Jael to the show, let's watch this clip and then Jael will come on.
And donut hours. We no longer wish to have a meeting or come to an agreement. There is no middle ground. The police are murdering Black men with no meaningful repercussions. This is not a problem of some other place or some other time. This is happening right here in Minneapolis. The severing the ties was the best way for our administration to demonstrate its commitment to ensuring that Black students on our campus felt safe, as they often have not, but also making sure that we sent a message that's saying that this was not okay. At first, I couldn't watch the video. I almost knew what was on the other end, and I knew that was going to be a traumatic experience. But I knew that I had to do something. And at the time to speak was not tomorrow. It wasn't in a week. It wasn't to wait for a statement to be drafted. And I remember many people asked me to wait to release this letter or wait till it quote unquote come down. And I said, we've been waiting. We've been waiting for decades. We've been waiting for centuries. The time is right now. We will never forget George Floyd, Philando Castile, Jamar Clark, and the countless lives that have been lost senselessly and needlessly at the murderous hands of police brutality. May you rest in power. I think the most exciting part of this for me has been how many other student leaders have reached out to me and asked me, how do I get the same exact thing to happen in my institution? And that's exactly the domino effect that we couldn't have predicted, but is the best outcome in my opinion. It's not just the change that happens here, but it's the change that inspires everyone to understand what's important.
All right, all right. Welcome, Miss Jael Karandi, to the show.
Hello,
Hey.
thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Miss Bianca, who will be the moderator for the show today. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome again. Hello. Hi, everybody watching, everybody here. I am very excited today because I get to talk to young scholars. Young minds are always good. I was once where you were, but I did not effect much change when I was younger. But I am glad that each one of you are doing your own part effecting change, and I'm very proud of all of you. So Miss Jael, Miss Kira, you weren't with us last time, but we welcome you to the panel because the young men here were here last time. So I guess today we have, we're going to do our pros and cons and have the women with us as well. So diving right in, and in your experience, and I think Miss Jael, you went in the streets. Basically, you did it. You saw an opportunity and you effected change. And let me start with you because we just saw your bio there. How did it feel for you? And when you went into this, did you go into it with emotions, or is it something you had thought about for a very long time, or did this invoke a lot of the feelings that you had within you when you decided to take up the cause after the George Floyd death?
Yeah, I think in general, the sentiment started when we were very young and we saw the murder of Trayvon Martin. And I think at that time, I can remember feeling very almost hopeless at what was going to happen or what part I had to play in changing that narrative or changing where justice was served. And for me, it really came down to once I saw the murder of George Floyd, what position was I in to make a change or to do something differently, right? And so you can see years later, now that I was very young at the time when the murder of Trayvon Martin happened, and now that I was in college and I had a position of leadership, there was no excuse anymore, right? We were right in, this was happening in Minneapolis. It wasn't happening in a different place where we could attribute it to the societal culture of that different place, but we were in Minneapolis. And for that reason, knowing where I was and what position I was in, I wanted to do something, and I wanted to do something immediately. And I think it's important that it was done right away. Sometimes we wait until things quote unquote calm down, or until people are ready to hear the message, or until we feel as if it's time for them to hear it. But I feel like it's always been time. And so for me, it was a matter of how quickly can we take this action? Because to me, there was only one action to take, right? Murder is nonpartisan. I don't think we should be arguing about what happened. There's a videographic evidence that shows exactly what happened and what that police officer did. To me, that should not be contradicted or argued with. So to me, the actions the university needed to take were very clear.
Good. So time. You effect change by being there at the moment and seizing the moment, basically, is what I'm hearing. So all of you guys, I'm going to throw a question out here today. We're going to do a discussion kind of thing. So I'm not going to do Q&A. We're just going to let it out today, right? We're all in agreement. So how often do you think about your racial or your ethnic identity when you're speaking? I know, Miss Kira, you're African American, but everyone else here has a little bit of culture like African background, in where both parents are African, and then they're now in a new culture where they're African American. So how does race and your identity, your own identity, how do you think about it? How do you view yourself? And how do you think the world views you as well? And any of you can just take it up.
Well, I know for me, as an African American woman in particular, and I'm probably going to be talking a lot about that, both race and gender kind of dynamics that I get a lot in my experience. But I know for me, I am often hyper aware of my Blackness, because I'm often in spaces that are predominantly white, whether it was in my education when I was in college, whether it's in my workplace now. I often sometimes find myself censoring myself in a way, if that makes sense, where, I don't want to be that angry Black woman. I don't want to be that aggressive, Black person coming at someone because, I disagree with them or whatever. So it's something that I kind of constantly think about and use that to perhaps change my actions, perhaps to my detriment, honestly, if I were to be honest. But yeah, I would say for how often, I would say very often, for sure.
Yeah, just to echo what Kira just said, I think it's one of those things that for me has been environment specific, if I could say that. Like it depends on where I am, the level of awareness to which I have to afford attention to my identity as a Black man, as an African man. And things like code switching, where you're in spaces, professional spaces, I've caught myself, trying to speak a little more, I guess they call it speaking white, trying to, subdue the accent and all that kind of stuff. But when I'm home, something like that, I'm not really thinking about that because it's a safe space. So I think for me, it's been where I am in the moment. And I think to Kira's point, I also attend a predominantly white institution. So when I'm in school, that is something that I'm constantly aware of, especially when you go to classes. Even the most intimidating being the smaller classes, because those are the ones where you're more face to face and it's a lot more intimate. And oftentimes you just notice that, just click that you're the only Black person in the room. A lot of the programs and research programs that I've done, like the one that I just currently graduated from, I was the only Black man in my cohort. So stuff like that, it's a constant thing. You always kind of just recognize and realize that it's there. And also, things like when you're driving, when you are going to the store, it's like you're looking for those. If you're not in a safe space, it's going to be in the forefront of my mind. It's been in the forefront of my mind. If I'm not home, if I'm not in church, I'm think it's somewhere in my head to, be aware that there's that kind of mirror or lens with which people are seeing me.
Yeah, I
Okay,
definitely.
Shahid, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I agree with a lot of the sentiments that Kara and Collins have said as well today. I think it's so interesting because there are certain places and certain environments in which blackness is celebrated, and blackness is even in a way aspired to in regards to just the culture and our influence on the culture. But at the same time, there are so many places where it's very clear that our culture is not welcomed, how we are is not welcome. Just us being normal, operating the way that we usually operate, that's not welcome and seemed as less than or whatever you want to, whatever you want to call it. I think I definitely see that, as everyone mentioned, in the workplace. My last job that I had was um, I was the only black person on my team. So there's a huge cultural difference there. There are a lot of things that were said, and I tried to know the difference between ignorance and hate, but there's definitely pretty much any job that I've had where I was the only black person there. There are always little comments, always little jokes that are said that just simply put should not have been said. In addition to that, just directly addressing your question of how frequently I think about my blackness, I think about it, like I said, in the scenarios in which it's celebrated, in the scenarios in which I know it's unwelcome, but also naturally, given the times that we're in right now with everything that's going on. Every time I see an injustice committed against our people, I think about my blackness heavily. Even just minding my own business, I find myself sometimes, if I go to the store and I see like an old white lady and I'm walking around the store, I don't know if, Collins, as a man, you may be able to relate to this a little bit, but I find myself like announcing what I'm doing so that whoever is around me doesn't feel like intimidated or like I'm going to attack them or something like that,
Yeah.
especially if I know I'm not dressed in like a suit or something. I find myself saying, let me find the butter, and just things like that out loud so people around me know that, so the times that we're in, encourage me to think about my blackness a lot, both in a way of, in a manner of just being proud of the things that we can accomplish and just who we are and our influence on the culture, but also just what we face on a day-to-day basis and the things that we have set up against us.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying about it's just simple things, just like when we step into the store. Because I've been in stores, and this has happened to everybody, where you'll find a store attendant following you around. Like, okay, you're following me to the dressing room. We're going over here, and you cannot basically shop in peace just because they attribute your presence to maybe that you're stealing or you don't have enough money to pay. And I'm not sure whether any of you have faced this, where you go to the counter to check out and they'll be like, are you sure this is about $150, $300? Are you sure, or would you like to take the there's a sale over there, or the sale rack, how they always point you to the sale rack. So things like this. So their preconceived notions about black people. Unfortunately, because a lot of black people have portrayed us a certain way. What people know, we are rappers, we dress a certain way, our hair is a certain way. But you, as young scholars, because you go to schools that are very diverse. Now you find yourselves, I'm assuming, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you find yourself trying to live above the fray, to go against what people's preconceived notions are about you. So here's a statement: black skin is beautiful if you wear it right. Black skin is beautiful if you wear it right. How would you address that? Do you have to behave a certain way? Because Colin said he has to speak proper, which is assumed as being white, not intellectual. See.
It's like, for some reason.
No,
sorry.
I
didn't know if someone
anyone
else was
can jump in at any time.
It just doesn't sit right with me, that statement. I just want to say black is beautiful, full stop. The black skin is beautiful, period. Because I mean it, and I'm sure we're all going to come to this conclusion perhaps, but it's like it shouldn't matter, you know, whether we dress this way or that way, whether we say things this way or that way, whether in this profession we went to this school, we didn't go to that school, we're not in this profession, you know, whatever it is. It's beautiful, full stop. Yeah.
I 100% agree with you. And even to add on to that, when we say right, what is right and what standards are we placing on that? I mean, it's usually a westernized standard of what we've considered beautiful, what we've considered professional, what we've considered to be the correct way to operate, right? We've siloed out any other mechanism of what we consider right because we've assimilated to the West. So we believe West is correct or West is right is a statement that's often used. And in that, it can be a very harmful narrative because what happens is we raise children to believe that they have to be a certain way to be considered correct, or a certain way to be considered accepted, or a certain way to get the job. So like Kira just said, Black is beautiful, period. Black skin is beautiful, period. And it really matters in these narratives that we push forward because I'm very concerned about how children will be raised. And even now with what we see in the media of what they're going to come to believe is true or is normalized just by what they're seeing. So statements such as that can be so harmful in the sense of it really preaches this narrative of somebody else has determined what's right. And if we are not fitted within this mold, we've either failed or we're not correct.
I totally agree. And I think it's another like angle of it is kind of this culture of placing value and worth on productivity. And, you know, it's a capitalistic kind of mentality. It's grounded in capitalism, the idea that you have to produce to be worth something. And a lot of times that puts pressure on a lot of parents and a lot of, you know, Black people because we feel like we have to be exceptional to be worthwhile, you know, to be worth living, to be worth enjoying life, to be worth living a normal life. But, you know, that in itself is rooted in white supremacy because it's kind of devaluing us until we produce something or until, you know, we're not inherently given value. I saw something early this week that said something like, you know, essentially, you should not be paying people more like a living wage because they work so that now they're worth it. But we should look at it that the people themselves are worth it, so they deserve to be paid a living wage and, you know, have all these other additional safety nets. And so that kind of idea of looking at people from their lens of productivity and also inherently us internalizing it to become kind of these people who are also judging ourselves based on our productivity causes a lot of pressure and a lot of times can be a trigger for depression and a lot of, you know, lack of self-worth or like low self-esteem or low self-efficacy because if you, especially in times like this within a pandemic and you find yourself, you know, hitting a productivity block or you know you don't get that job or you don't get into that school, then you internalize that to kind of devalue yourself when in fact the case is that you are inherently worth it, you are inherently beautiful, you are inherently, you know, supposed to be here. Everything else is just, you know, icing on the cake. Your life is the cake. Everything else you do after that is just icing on the cake, and life is just beautiful like that.
Interesting. Yes, Tate.
Yeah, I love what Kira said. Black is beautiful, full stop, period. You know, I think it kind of brings me back to what I was saying earlier, how in some instances our culture, who we are, is so celebrated and taken seriously, but in other areas it's just like, you know, leave that at home. You know, I see that a lot in the workplace. Personally, I feel as though I see it a lot with Black women, which is why I was really interested to hear your responses. I have a friend, and she's a businesswoman. She's an entrepreneur, and you know, she doesn't have a crazy hairstyle or anything like that. It's not a mohawk or some, you know, loud color. Not that anything is wrong with that, but you know, her hair is just in a natural, you know, culturally Black way. I don't remember the hairstyle, but it might have been braids or something. I'm not sure. But she was telling me how she has to have her hair a certain way in order for people to take her seriously. And even though I'm not a woman, that just is so crazy to me. That just, it actually angers me that, you know, your culture being represented in your hair is seen as unprofessional, you know, but you have other cultures who they can represent their culture in their hair just fine, you know, but our culture is not celebrated. Our culture is not welcomed in the business world for some reason. And I think that's wild. So that statement, even though I can see like where there's seemingly some heart in it, but essentially to me, what it's saying is like, black is beautiful, but like, I need you to leave some of that black stuff at home with you. You know what I mean? Black is beautiful, but like, don't bring it to work with you. Black is beautiful, but like, keep it at the house. We just want this much of you, but not all of you. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know. I just think that is it's crazy, but I love what everyone said. That was very, very powerful.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
also just to add
and
to that point a little bit.
yeah.
Sorry, Bianca.
Mhm. No, you're good. You're
It's
good.
yeah. When we're talking about like you mentioned something like hip hop and all of the popular, uh, I guess you call it mainstream, or kind of the most visible part aspect of Black culture. It kind of comes back to this idea of um, you know Black is only worth it when it's making profit. And I guess I would love to hear Kira and Jel your experience with this, but there's also this idea we can see in a lot of trends, um, and it's not until white people validate or affirm the trend or the aspect of the culture that it becomes acceptable or quote unquote more popular. So things like hoop earrings, you know what I mean? Those are things that Black women were doing way before they became popular, but until white women started doing it, even braids, you see these days being a controversial issue of like hair and cultural appropriation. So stuff like
Mhm.
that, it's like until it's making profit. Even we could even go ahead as far as to talk about marijuana. The marijuana industry is booming right now. There's millions of Black men and women in jail, in prison, for minor, possession charges. And in states like California, Colorado, white people are making millions and millions from this industry, while there has not been restorative justice to that community, to the communities that were hurt by this, the children that were raised without fathers, the communities that were, had their sons and daughters taken away from them. There has not been any um, healing done to those people. There's not been any financial support offered to those people as far as now that it's quote unquote acceptable and is making profit. The benefits are now going to the people that were hurt by it. Um, and so things like that, it's like you notice a trend where it's our value is kind of tied to the profits that they can that the powers that be and the system that is currently in place can siphon from it, can take away from it, rather than kind of giving it inherent value. Even in schools, we study a lot of the Western literature canons. This is something from my school. I go to Columbia. We have these classes that everybody's required to take. They call them masterpieces of Western literature, masterpieces of Western art, music. We have to take those classes, but there's no acknowledgement of all of the history and the masterpieces that have come from Africa, from South America, from all these other places.
Okay, and I heard you talk about cultural appropriation, which what happens when for example, I'll give you, and because Tate talked about hair, because the hair industry is $1 billion industry at the moment. And what I'm wearing is not a natural hairstyle for for all intensive purposes. I'm wearing it because I don't want to feel like I don't want to comb my hair. But then the two ladies here are beautifully wearing their natural protective styles, which we've been using for years. You understand? But unfortunately, if you're going into a workplace professionally as women, you cannot. There's some places where they're not going to allow you to go with your braids, to go with your twisted protective styles. Although now it's a little more acceptable because we made it trendy. So how is it that, and then when you see a white person um culturally appropriate, like what Kim K did the day she woke up and did cornrows on her hair, and then we all went up in arms because she took our blackness away and used it for herself. So how do we come to a middle ground where they can accept the way we do our hair? Because African Americans, black people, we're very artistic when it comes to hair. And how do we find that good balance? And how do we end up then portraying our blackness and not letting people steal our blackness away from us?
I get this is actually, I think, a great question, but a bit of a complex one in the sense of it requires acceptance, right? It requires us to ask somebody to accept me the way I am. And for that, it feels hard because how can I force you? But something in which I believe where we can start to shift this isn't even necessarily in the workplace, but in K through 12 schools. Right. It breaks my heart when little girls are going to school and they're being told to go back home because of the way their hair was. And it's usually because, quote unquote, it was distracting, or a student felt like this when they saw their hair, or there was too many beads. Like just these very nuanced or very flimsy excuses that are sometimes utilized to kind of negate somebody wearing their hair the way they need to wear it. So from my understanding, I would like to see policies in K through 12 that allow young kids to wear their hair the way their parents have chosen them to wear their hair. So that feeds later to the people that see them around start to get comfortable or start to understand that this is the way I wear my hair, and it's not up to you to accept it, but to be perfectly fine with how it is, right? Because when we wait for people to accept and we wait for people to accept, we'll be waiting forever, right? I can't force you to say, yes, my hair is okay for the workplace, or yes, this is fine. And I think what we can start to do is hold people accountable to their policies. In the same way universities have statements of diversity and equity and inclusion, so do companies, right? That's inclusive of my whole being, and my head is inclusive of that. So I think it's holding them down to, if this is something that is going to be taken up with HR, it's to say, well, this would go against the very policy that you gave me, or the very thing that you told me. But I really do believe some of this stuff has to start in K through 12, because that's where they're learning this behavior. That is where all of this is starting to come up. This is where students are starting to learn these norms of that hair isn't accepted, or that hair isn't okay, because they've seen students get in trouble. So now they start to associate with something negative, rather than growing up and knowing that's her hair and that's the way it is. And that actually has nothing to do with me.
And also, whoever speaks next, I think Kira, you're about to speak next. I'd like you to also touch on the effect that the $1 billion industry of hair has on younger kids, because you're seeing now that black little girls are not made to accept their hair, that is too kinky. Then you're seeing weaves and wigs and stuff on kids because the parents want to belong, quote unquote, want to belong. And so you're seeing these little girls grow up way faster than they're supposed to.
Yeah, and I was going to probably touch on that as well, where, you know, part of that acceptance when in schools is also acceptance from even just the greater, I don't know, I just always think of the advertising industry, because when I just remember when I was a little girl, I got my first relaxer, I would say when I was around 10. And that was when, you know, I would have my Barbie dolls. They were all straight haired, you know, white Barbie dolls that I saw in the toy store. Even the black Barbie dolls that my parents got me had straight hair. My mom, she had a relaxer ever since I was little. That's kind of just how I knew her. So the people around me, the female role models, the advertisements that I would see, the people on TV who looked like me, they all had straight hair. And to me, that was like, okay, if they have straight hair, then I should have straight hair to be just like them, to be beautiful just like them. So kind of, you know, as you were saying, Jal, part of that acceptance, not only in schools, but I would say also even in, you know, just how we talk about ourselves, or how we, you know, visualize ourselves, and how parents talk to their children too. Because a lot of what, you know, kids, how they see themselves is from their parents, and from the society at large as well. So just really putting out like, hey, your curly hair, your kinky curly hair is beautiful. Like when it's in braids, it is just as beautiful as if it were straight, as if it were curly, as if it were wavy, you know, whatever the case may be. And just really honing in on that beauty that they have in their, you know, own natural state. Yeah.
Okay, and this goes into, I think, and what Miss Wilda Black says here, is it that we have not educated people enough on who we are as people, on who we are as people? Do you think we have not educated them enough? And then I'm going to add something on here so you guys can discuss this, is how often do you interact with people from other races? How do you immerse yourself, even sometimes immerse yourself in groups which are different from you, so that you can educate them on really what it is to be black, and what you wish for them to do, or how you want them to interact. Do you do it intentionally? Do you interact intentionally with people who are diverse or different from you? And that, does that
Uh,
serve as an education, like Miss Wilda is asking? Do you think we haven't educated them enough?
yeah, I think that's a good question. The only pushback that I would have is that it kind of comes from the with the premise that it's on us to educate. I think, especially with I the current movement, there's a kind of a very an exhaustion or kind of the acknowledgement that we've been doing the work for centuries, but it's like arguing with the wall. I think it's time for the other side to really reach in. There's plethora. We've written books, we've taught classes, we have gone to the streets, we have tried to live our lives to the fullest, to be as diverse as we can. Um, I think I think by us living, even by us going out, doing what we do, having our events and kind of our spaces and just kind of existing in itself is education and enough to anybody that is trying to understand what being black is, because by us living, we are being like that is being black. We are being and we are black. Um, so I don't think as far as like have we educated enough, I think the reception has been subpar and needs to be improved. Now, with that being said, I also want to echo what Giles said. I think the education system is a perfect place to put a lot of pressure and a lot of emphasis on, because those are impressionable kids, and those are the people that grow up to be adults that make the policies that make society. At that age is when a lot of foundational principles are formed. That's when your moral compass is formed. At that age, if like she mentioned, when we see black boys and girls being punished harsher for things like playing dodgeball and hitting a white kid in the face, or fighting, or coming to hair with you know like I said, like kinky hair, or just braids or whatever, that forms or it reinforces the moral compass of racism. So a white child grows up seeing that, and we know that nobody's born with prejudices, and they grow up with those kind of understanding that this is what it's supposed to be, this is what it is. When they get to the workforce, when they become the CEOs, when they become the politicians, they don't have the same empathy, or it's this that relation for extending their moral compass to understand and value black life the way that they would for their white counterparts. Now, to touch on your question as far as like how actively do I engage with diverse people, I'm a very friendly person. So in that regard, like I make a lot of friends. However, I think one thing that I noticed, especially being in a predominantly white institution, is it's so exhausting on a day-to-day basis as far as like just the amount of performance that you have to, or the way that you have to carry yourself throughout the day, that when it comes to who I'm making my friends, I really don't. I want people who are I can connect with in an organic way. Like I don't want to be thinking about, oh, are they gonna get this reference, or are they gonna understand what I'm saying, are they gonna judge me for how I'm talking. I just want to be with people who understand me for who I am, because we have a shared experience. So with that being, like, that's where, especially when it comes to like my closer circles, that's where it is. But when it comes to more professional settings and more class settings, I do engage with those people. I push back on, that's the space where I take up space and do that work to represent myself first, because there's also another layer to this where whenever you're in these spaces, they expect you to be the representative of the entire black race. That's a whole nother topic. But representing myself and making sure that I am pushing back on whatever misconceptions, whatever um, what's the word, preconceived notions that they may have about me, whatever expectations they might have placed on me because I'm black, and just kind of representing and showing out myself for who I am and pushing back on those narratives to try and, in fact, I guess you call it, educate them in that way, in that moment. But as far as personal relationships, I don't really have too many white friends or anything like that, personally.
Yeah, I think
I
yeah, piggybacking on Lauren Hill, the miseducation. Sometimes I think we kind of miseducate people instead of giving them the correct education. I think when just because of the way maybe the way blackness is portrayed, and that that I feel sometimes is because a lot of the people who we hold up high, the people who are supposed to be speaking for us, example, the celebrities and everything, they portrayed blackness in a very different, very different light.
I I was just going to touch on this a little bit, if I can. I think there's this narrative that Black people are monolith, and I think we've been trying to talk about it a little bit. Of like, we are just this very consistent stream, and this is the Black person you're supposed to get, and if you don't get this Black person, well, oops, like you didn't get the right one.
Yeah.
And the reason I find this so troubling is I don't think it is our job to educate anybody about our experience, because nobody comes to us and educates them about our experience. How do we understand others when people don't make the same investment? And what that really comes from is, for so long, this country has viewed us as a partial person, right? To them, we aren't even worthy of being viewed as a whole person. So when we look at it, people haven't even yet realized our humanity and who we are as people to first then realize our experience, or start to even try to understand or empathize. And, Angela Rye said something really powerful. She said, this country offers liberties of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and we're still stuck at life. Right? We're still trying to fight for our mere existence. And so when we're still there, to me, the only education people need to start understanding is about redlining and how the housing industry has continuously kept Black people from getting loans and being in places. It's about the education system and how Black and brown children are disproportionately arrested from schools, but also suspended at a rate more than times their white peers. Or talking about the healthcare industry and how Black women are dying at the hands of doctors day in and day out. To me, that is the education that they need to take time to understand before we even start talking about understanding our experience or culture, because that's not something I need to come and tell you. That is something you take time to research by yourself and understand. Because it's gotten to the point to me that people are coming up to me and asking me about your experience or your hair or your culture, when for any other culture, they would go and read that on their own, right? This stuff has been literaturized, it's in readings, and there's Black people everywhere. There's Black people in Italy, there's Black people in Australia. We are not a monolith to be said that this is how everybody acts and this is what we need to see.
So in that thing, and I think Tate, you haven't, and I have a quick question for the men as well. But before then, just going off of what she said, we've been trying to explain ourselves for years. We've sat here, we've tried to educate people, quote unquote. We've tried to engage people. We've tried it for years, and obviously it's not working, because for 400 years, when we've been trying to explain, why is it? Why can't we come together as Black people and make it for ourselves? Why can't we come in, have our own our own Wall Street, have our own schools, have our own grocery stores, have our own communities?
Yeah,
have our own TV. Yes. Why can't we?
We did.
We have colleges and universities.
We had Black Wall Street, right? Black Wall Street was destroyed. We had Black neighborhoods, and they were destroyed by infrastructure and city governments. We tried to have these things, and part of it is just that in how the system is rooted, right? When you play into the system directly and how it was designed to be built, it's going to destroy such that it wasn't designed for, right? So things like Black Wall Street, it was tried. That's why people are trying to have things like Black-owned banks, right? So credit and loans are issued in a certain way. Like you were just about to mention, HBCUs. People are trying to make these from ourselves, but you can see that in how our governments operate in our cities, our states, our local, how money is distributed, how wealth is distributed, how resources are distributed are still going to be disproportionate. And then these things end up not working, or they end up failing because they come back and destroy them because the system was not built for those to be sustained.
Okay, and a lot of people always say that, fine, we can give Black people, we can give us all these things, but we are never good caretakers of what we are given.
Cap. I think that's just
they say that we're not good caretakers of what we're given.
I mean, one of the wealthiest empires in history was in Africa, Mali. One of the most arguably kind of, we don't even understand it to this day, Egypt. Like some of the things that they were able to do. Not even think about Black alone. Take it to South America. Like the people, the communities, and the people that lived there, and the things they were able to accomplish without technology or the kind of tech that we have today. That kind of is a statement that is put in place to justify the reasons why, it's one of those quotes where they say, you have to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but then, Black people don't even have the boots. So we can't really, what are we pulling on? And like Jael mentioned, we had Black Wall Street, one of the wealthiest um, at that time, and it was a threat to the system, to the white system that was in place and currently is in place. And so they bombed it. You know what I mean? And there was, even in New York City, there was a Black community that was growing, where Central Park is sitting. I think it was called Selma. I'm not sure. Um, but they were a Black middle class community was coming up. They built their own school. They had their own houses, setting up everything that you need to pass down generational wealth and to kind of establish that chain of a standard of living that is, there's a good standard of living. And the city just came in and just grabbed the land, put down those houses, and put a park. Like, you know what I mean? So it's one of those things where you will look at all of these statements because when they are put out and we internalize them, and then we don't pursue those leadership positions because we're like, yeah, at the end of the day, we're Black, we're bad caretakers, or even the idea that Black people don't read. Who said that? Like, you know what I mean? If we had access to libraries, if we had access to these things, we're going to take advantage of them just the same way as anybody who does not have these barriers and these obstacles to overcome every day, day in and day out would. So we have to take into account all the pressures that are holding us down. It's like we're expected to swim at the same pace, but we have a boulder tied to our leg. It doesn't make sense. You can't compare those two.
Yeah, I was gonna say, kind of in response to the previous question, I think it's interesting how, like, if you were to have a situation where you had one person inflicting mental abuse on someone, verbal abuse on someone, physical abuse on someone for an extended period of time, you wouldn't tell the person who was receiving that abuse, oh, you just need to teach your abuser how to treat you right. You know what I mean? In any other situation, we would say, yo, get away, get that person in jail. Let's depend on legal, let's do what we need to do to get things in order. But Black people are always charged to fix what the abuser messed up, which is interesting to me. That isn't, by no means am I implying that we should sit on our hands and do nothing, but I just think that it's interesting sometimes how we focus so much on what Black people need to do as opposed to just the real problem, which is like holding the abuser accountable. But in regards to what the topic right now, in regards to us being able to take care of things, I think we also have to educate ourselves on what Black people are doing today. Like, Black people are doing amazing things today. There's Black Wall Street, but I mean, even now, even in the civil rights movement, think about all the things that Black people have contributed to society. Think about all the inventions. Think about all the things that we would not be able to do that we use on a day-to-day basis if it was not for Black people. Think about the million-dollar companies that Black people are owning and thriving in very well right now, providing opportunities for other people of culture very well right now, even in the entertainment industry, providing opportunities for people to gain income, but also using that entertainment to educate the world in a very comprehensive, digestible way. You know what I mean? So I think that we have to be careful, kind of like what Colin said. Like, one, we need to ask ourselves, where did this come from? Who said that? Who said Black people can't read or don't read? Who said Black people don't care this stuff? Who said all these negative things? Because sometimes we buy into these stereotypes, and then sometimes we embrace those in stereotypes. So I think, one, we have to ask who said that, and I think secondly, we have to educate ourselves. And I think, I don't remember if it was Kira or Jael that said, like, we're not a monolithic thing. There's so many different types of people, and also it's okay for Black people to not be perfect. You know what I mean? So white people have people in power and celebrities who are crazy too. White people have people in power and influences and celebrities that feed into all of this negative energy too. So we're allowed to not be a perfect people. You know what I mean? So I just leave it right there. Those are my thoughts.
I think, like, the spotlight is always shining on black folk. Everybody's always anticipating probably that we're going to mess up, or probably that we're going to do the wrong thing. So there's not a positive connotation when it comes to explaining Blackness. It's usually looked in the light of negativity. But we can change that. And I have a question here that's really interesting. I have a couple questions which I'm going to put all together, and you guys can answer them the way you want. How do you define beauty when it comes to men? When you look at your black women, how do you define beauty? And black women, do you find that black men have a different view on what they call the beautiful black woman, or the beautiful black strong woman sometimes is misconstrued as that you're using the black strong woman in a negative way. And then of course, when we wear weaves and wigs and chemically processed hairs, are we subconsciously sending messages to young girls? And how do parents model to young girls as we embrace your own natural hair? So all this is in one question. All of you can take that. And how does anything that you do physically, emotionally, and religion as well, how does that play in the makeup of your own racial identity? How you view yourself, and how you want people to view you. Take it
I'm
away.
I'm gonna
That's a
speak
lot.
on.
I know, just I'm just like, I'm just trying to mix everything in there and remix in so we get to cover all that, because this is interesting. Okay, take it away, anyone.
I know for me, and I think Jel, you kind of hinted at this a bit. I know first and foremost, when it comes to beauty, or when it just comes to seeing myself, or how other people see me, rather, I want to be seen as human. Like, I want to be seen as just a normal person who has thoughts, who has fears, who has dreams, who has opinions. Um, and I feel like that's kind of the first order of business, at least in my mind, just seeing me as a person, an individual person. Um, and then when it comes to, I know I was going to take the question about, parents and role models, and about, how to embrace our own natural hair. Um, I think one of the ways, and I think I've experienced this with my own parents as well as I grew up, is just my parents really embracing their own hair. Like, my mom and I went natural together. Like, I cut my hair
Mm-hmm.
soon after she did when I went to college, and I just, big chop, super short afro. Um, and we went on this journey together. Like, we went to the store and just bought products together. We discovered ways that we could do our hair together. And it was a way that we could, of course, bond as a mother and daughter, but also just really embrace who we are, embrace our blackness, embrace our natural hair in the way that it is. So in terms of, how parents, whether mother or father, can really, be a role model to young women, about wearing their natural hair, just really be intentional about showing or telling them that their hair is beautiful, their hair is, wonderful, it is artistic, it is, and also just going out of, being able to be involved in just that whole process, because to be honest, it is a process. I know for me, it was a process just to get to like a state where I accepted my hair for what it was, but really just be there for that process and for that journey. I think that's a big step.
Okay, keep going, guys. Tate, how do you define a beautiful black woman, or the strength of a black woman? Okay, anyone else can? We can't hear you. I think you're muted out. I
Yeah,
I
I
can't
can
hear
take it
you.
while he's
Okay,
There
fixing
you
here
it.
we
go.
go.
Oh, go
Okay.
ahead.
Mhm.
I was trying to unmute it and it didn't want to work with me.
Oh no, you're good now. We can hear you.
Yeah, so I think that beauty, there's two ways to look at beauty. I think that there's a subjective version of beauty, that deals heavily into the preferences that someone may have. Someone may have a preference for someone who's taller, someone may have a preference who's someone who's shorter, whatever the case may be. But aside from just like subjective beauty, I personally define beauty, or I personally believe that everyone is beautiful, based strictly because we are creations that of God. The Bible says that we're wonderfully and beautifully made. So I don't think that any one person gets to define beauty. I think God defines beauty because he said, that we're all beautifully made. So as far as the black woman, I think the black woman is beautiful not because of what someone else said or, anything that I saw, but I think black woman is beautiful because she's a creation of God. Um, yeah, and I guess I would just leave it at that.
It's a hard answer to follow. I think, yeah, I agree with everything that he just said. Um, I think for me, the biggest thing, I'm just gonna tackle the more subjective side of it, because that's really where, when it comes in terms of society, there's a lot of implications. Um, Beauty can be also looked at as a form of currency, in the sense that there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of, I guess you call it privilege, that comes with what is socially accepted as beautiful, as desirable, those kinds of things. And this comes to what Pierre mentioned, advertisements, what you see in media, and stuff like that. So we also have to recognize a lot of times, but I think this is where the discussion with uh, dark skinned women and how they're perceived against lighter skinned women. A lot of times men lose sight in this mention of, it's my preference. I just have a preference for lighter skinned women, without acknowledging the influences that have built up that preference. So we have to recognize that there are forces, outside forces, that define what is desirable for us. From what we see in the media, from what we see that men with six pack and big arms and deep voice are what is acceptable. So men also try to gauge themselves against that benchmark. It's a lot more enforced for women because there's also that gender disparity, where we live in a patriarchal society. So, even if a man is quote unquote not desirable, they're still going to be most likely going to be making more than a woman in the same job. They're most likely going to have a lot more different privileges than a woman. So there's that kind of aspect to it. So there's a psychosocial element to it that is what we see and how we engage with beauty in society. At the end of the day, it comes back to the idea of education, understanding that we are all inherently beautiful because we were made in God's own image, and God is the essence of perfection. So if we're made in the image of perfection, then everybody's perfect in a sense. You know what I mean? That kind of just deductive reasoning. And so with by associating that kind of, I think another thing is, okay, another thing for me is that we place value or self-worth on beauty, especially like physical beauty. I think that's another thing that we also have to dissociate, or at least challenge in our thinking, in our processing. Catch yourself. We treat people who are attractive differently than people who are not, and sometimes it's subconscious, sometimes it's unintentional. But when you catch yourself doing that, when you catch yourself looking, staring at a person who's quote unquote overweight, which is also another topic of discussion. When you catch yourself staring at somebody who has a disability and you're looking down on them, challenge those, be like, why am I feeling this way? Why is this? What is the root cause of this? And unlearning those kind of behaviors and those kinds of attitudes is kind of really the first step. And also to Kira's point with parents and how they portray themselves to their children, I think we also have to be gracious to them because they're also dealing with the same challenges that we are dealing with today. In some cases, they grew up in worse conditions. So there's a lot of, you can think of it like all this mud that has been pasted on over their lives and over their self-worth and over their, perceptions of who they are. They can really only carry so much to their children, to the next generation. And to their credit, I think, as things are changing, they're also doing the work. Like my mom, for example, same as Akira, she also did the big chop and kind of went natural. And I'll kind of be watching her go through that journey has been so beautiful. And so it's one of those things where we also have to acknowledge the parents are also human, and they also are dealing with the same challenges the same way. They have the same psychological impact on them, and that as long as I think it's one of those things where as long as you're doing your best to push yourself forward every day, when you realize, when you come to a point where you have read a book that gives you a different perspective, or you've seen or heard a story or a narrative that has challenged something about the way you perceive people, you choose to grow rather than choose to be ignorant, because it causes a cognitive dissonance when what you believe is met with the contradiction of reality. And oftentimes people choose to just stick with what they've been knew and what they thought was true and what they've been like they have been knowing that is the case, rather than shifting to accept what it is in reality.
And I like that. The thing is, you guys are younger. There's hope still. The older folks like us, sometimes, or the generation like my parents, sometimes it's hard to kind of change what they've known, what has been, because the lens that they see life through is very different from ours. And of course, the children. A viewer here commented. Teacher George said, "Does the circle that's formed around children really matters." And I think that you guys can, and you guys are affecting change, and that's the only way. There's still hope, because racism is not something you're born with; it's something that you learn, and can be easily unlearned, I believe. So, what are some actions here as we close out? What are some actions you think that as individuals or as a team wholly can we take to nurture an anti-racist environment, so we can all cohabit and exist in peace and be able to achieve our full potential? Anyone can take it away at this point.
Yeah, I think there's a few things we can do. I think for those of us who are either students or part of different institutions, speaking up is very important, and holding institutions accountable to policies that they put forth. I like to tell people we're not making up anything new. They've already said this is something they value. Now we're just holding them to it. And I think my mom always told me, like, you're like Queen Esther, right? You were put in this place for such a time as this. So as we're in these different spaces at this time, it is so important that we speak up and say something about these policies that are put in place, and be willing to challenge them, especially at places where we're paying money, right? There's nowhere else where you go and you pay money and you don't expect a return on your investment. And that should be the same thing at institutions of any place. A second thing I really encourage people to do is really vote. I think voting is very important, and especially voting local. I think a lot of the decisions that we've been seeing are being made at your local, your city council, right? Elections that people sometimes avoid or don't really take part in. Your local and state elections are so key in some of these decisions that are going to affect your everyday life. And the third thing I really think is really important is find spaces in which you can breed community, and you can be able to go in and really engage with your community. All these different mutual aid funds that we've been seeing coming up, or people having volunteer drives, or rebuilding the community. What the media doesn't show us is the people that are rebuilding back the community, or putting the community back together, is the community that it was taken from. And so finding time to engage in that, I think, has been very powerful to see is how many people are willing to do that work and challenge your friends. Social media is not the only protest that you can do, right? Don't be confused about people who go post on social media but won't show up. And people who won't be willing to fight on your behalf, won't be willing to pull you into the seat that they are in, and be willing to understand how to do this. Because like I said, at the end of the day, we still aren't even at the point at which we have humanity. So really making sure that people who are your friends or your white allies, whoever they may be, wherever they may be, even non-Black people, making sure that anti-Blackness is not there, and they're truly being allies that can really push forward this work.
Great. And when you all are answering your questions, I think we kind of went over it, but I would like you to include in your answer. And Jael, you can kind of, before you hand it over to somebody else, I would like for you all to just say what impact did religion have and your faith, your personal faith beliefs, how have they impacted how you view the world, or in your and loving your neighbor?
Yeah, I would say definitely heavily. Even when we were talking about the last topic about beauty, I can remember very early on my father constantly telling me, "You're fearfully and wonderfully made," and having so many questions about my skin, so many questions about why students didn't like me, or why it was always this competition between a fair-skinned girl and a girl like me. And I think we don't talk enough about colorism, we don't talk enough about race, but I can distinctively remember my father telling me that. And even to the hair aspect, my mom telling me, "Oh, you don't need that. Like, your hair is beautiful just the way it is." So that influence is so important. And that came because of what Che just mentioned about in the Bible, how it talks about you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And so in terms of how I believe my religion has shaped anything that I know, it shaped the views and the compassion that I wish to have, right? And seeing people as human and seeing people as equally, but treating and making sure we are doing things that are equitable. And I think that is something that has really kind of pushed me, because in my opinion, it's not just on my behalf, but for the young girls right now who are in third grade, they have to see a better world, right? And if I'm doing my job, they will. And so for me, religion, or my faith in God, has really put together how I can move forward with this work, but also have the passion to continue doing it.
Great.
Love that. I think I really like that answer, and I agree wholeheartedly, and I can relate to it. A sermon that always kind of come. I don't know when I heard it in my life, but at some point in the past 21 years, I heard it, and the pastor said that the same way that anything you buy, if it's a computer, if it's a lawnmower, whatever tool you buy, comes with a manual. But this brain that we were given, this body, this life that we were given, the manual to it is the Bible. And when, in the moments that I've engaged with it, and it's the book of Psalms built my moral compass. The idea of we're fearfully and wonderfully made kind of strengthens your self-esteem and your self-efficacy. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned. This Jal mentioned the story of Esther, and kind of understanding that you've been understanding the moments where you've been given an opportunity to impact change. Understanding that when you're in a room and I'm the only Black man in my cohort, and I'm the only individual that I have access to this space, that is a door that has been opened for me to pull people in from my community. So kind of recognizing that, and all those lessons that we can take from the story of David and Goliath, how to stand up to the mountain and to just have faith in God and to take that leap of faith. You know what I mean? There's countless lessons, and it's one of those things where we hear it and it kind of becomes redundant, and kind of we overlook it. But when they say that there's literally an answer to everything in the Bible, I mean, I don't think I've gone to the Bible to look for an answer and I've not come out with an answer. So that's the impact that it's had on my life. And it's been the foundation, or at least the base from which I have launched and kind of pushed myself. And they say faith is the trust in things unseen. You told me 5 years ago that I would be at Columbia University about to graduate in a year, I would have been like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
What is a Columbia? What is a New York City? But taking that leap of faith and just going, that's really just, yeah, I could go on talking. When it comes to this, we could be here for a while. But yeah, I just leave it at that.
Amazing.
I know for me, there's this video that I watched by, I think, the Bible Project a while back. It was on social justice, and it really impacted me. And the main quote from that video was, the gospel, like the main kind of premise of the gospel is social justice. Like that is our social justice as Christians. And when you look at the life of Christ, when you look at how he interacted with the people around him, what did he do? He intentionally supported, uplifted, and elevated those who are marginalized in his community, those who are discriminated against, those who are thought little of, whether it was, women, whether it was the Samaritans, whether it was lepers, just all sorts of people that, the higher ups at the time would just look down on. He elevated them. And whenever I hear unfortunately, I'm sure many of us have had this experience where we have Christians say that, oh, we shouldn't be involved in these protests because we have to be meek and lowly and love our neighbor. And that's kind of how they interpret it. But when I see, being meek, being lowly, loving our neighbor, being humble, being Christ-like, that doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to injustices. It doesn't mean that we just ignore, wrongdoings that are done. Because I always think, when Christ went to the temple and he saw all this injustice, economic injustice happening, he just overturned the tables because he was angry and he knew, that they were, desecrating his Father's space. And I think when it comes, bringing it back to right now, in terms of how I see, the gospel and how I see, being a Christ-like person, interacting in this world today, I seek to act intentionally, because Christ, as he interacted with, say, Mary Magdalene or with lepers, he was intentional about what he would do. He knew their needs and he acted accordingly. And a lot of those actions, I think, are, pretty much what Giles said earlier about, supporting different voting, supporting, for example, Black businesses could be another thing. Using your time and energy and money to support people who may be marginalized or may not have as much support right now. It could be mentoring someone who's younger than you to, continue to step up the ladder where they are. So I think a lot of those actions, it can be so much, but really being just intentional and just really being intentional about it is, I think, the kind of core of it.
Correct, Mr.
Intentional,
Tate.
reflective, and present. Yeah, I like that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Intentional and
To I guess kind of answer the question before the question. You asked
yeah.
like as far as solutions and everything, and I think Jael and Kira really kind of gave all the solutions. But for the most part, I mean, I'm sure there's many others, but those are some really really solid ones. Jael kind of touched on how like it's not even necessarily about us wanting you to accept us, but like let's address the real thing, issues at hands, like social injustice and wrongful convictions and these and like real things, just simply cases of equality. So two organizations that I want to, I guess, just inform everybody about if you're just looking for something that you can do right now and just contribute to in a monetary way right now. There's the Equal Justice Initiative, which is an organization that fights for criminal justice reform. And then there's also the Innocence Network, which is an organization that follows wrongful convictions and fights for those people. So those are just two, I guess, kind of bigger organizations that you can look into and just invest into in that way. But I would also encourage everyone to look into look locally and see what you have what you have available to you. And like both Jael and Kira said, like vote locally, vote on a national level. These are the ways that we can just get some of the basic things that we want, which is just equality. But in regards to how my faith impacts me in my fight or my experience in this journey, I really love what Kira said about how sometimes, in so many words, we hear the narrative of just pray and that's it. But the Bible says that faith without works is dead.
Without works.
So you don't pray for a job and not apply for the job. Like nothing else.
True.
We don't embrace that mentality with anything else, but for some reason when people's lives are being taken, now we're just like, oh yeah, just pray but don't do anything because that's ungodly. I think that's very interesting. So I think for me it's understanding that faith without works is dead. I think for me it's also you guys kind of touched on just having a deeper level of empathy and understanding for people, but also understanding that the Bible is a book that encourages to fight for justice and to fight for equality for all people. And, love is not necessarily saying, oh, everybody else is better than me and I don't deserve any rights. I say, the Bible says to love your neighbor as you love yourself. So we're encouraged not just to love our neighbor, but we have to love ourselves too, and loving God, and all of those things come together and build up off of each other. So yeah, I would say my faith largely impacts, it calls me to action. But I think my faith also calls me to a deeper level of understanding, empathy, love. I think my faith encourages me to fight against maybe bitterness or hate that's really easy to allow to overtake you if you're not careful. And you can fight against something without hating somebody. I can fight against racists without hating a racist. It's very possible. So I think that those are the ways for me that faith has impacted me in my journey.
Oh, and that's
Yeah,
an
and I mean, I think
amazing
another thing is
point
also we
there.
have to be
Yes.
willing to do it to it's scary, but to death. Like Christ, went all the way. He went all the way, and even up until the point where they were stabbing him on a cross, he still did not curse these people. He could have just been like, you know what, God, wrap it up. Wrap it up. It's done.
I'm done.
And he
Yeah.
didn't. So that kind of resilience is also another thing I wanted to echo. You have to go beyond thoughts and prayers, which are important, but take that next step.
Thank you, guys. This conversation, of course, is by no. I would love to talk to you guys for hours and hours, and unpack a lot of things by themselves, like topics by themselves. But that was a good insight. Young minds are always very fresh, and you guys have a lot of wisdom even in your younger years. And I'm very proud of everything that you are all doing. And anybody who and everyone who's watching, I would love, like I said last week, I think the ladies weren't here. I would like to see you all come up with a mentorship program where you can mentor the young people, because I think that's where the hope lies therein. As opposed, I mean, there's some people you can't change their minds, but there's hope therein. It lies in the younger generation. And so, and I'm proud of everything that you are all doing. And you can follow these young, wonderful people on their own social media pages, and to all the to everything that they work for. And I think Tate mentioned a few organizations that you can look into. So basically, what they've said here in wrapping up is be intentional in your actions. Faith doesn't come alone; it comes with works. In order to effect change, we have to be willing to get out there and work. Make sure you intentionally, locally vote. Make sure you're involved in your community, as I was hearing you guys saying. Make sure you're involved in your community. Let's be willing to do the work, and speak out on injustices whenever you see them. Don't be afraid to speak out, and love thy neighbor as yourself, and God most importantly. And very important is lead by example. If we lead by example, I think everybody else will follow through. Thank you so much. And I'm hoping that I will see you guys here again soon, and you can report back about what wonderful changes you're making. And I hope we'll have more conversations with you guys in the future. I thank you so much, and God bless. And I'm sure your parents are really proud of each and every one of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank
All right, I'll
you.
hand it over to Miss Wilda as we close out.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was a very good conversation, and you can agree with me. Parents, let's acknowledge our children and let them know that they are beautiful. Their hair is beautiful. For me, if I take off this hat, I all have my sister locks in it. I am all natural. So let's encourage them. It doesn't matter where they are in corporate America, in wherever they are beautiful. And let's educate the people around us. And I like what Miss Jane Elliott says. He said, we are all of the same race. We are equally human. So let's take that with us. And we need to let go of our fears, and we have to be able to look racism in the eye. Whatever we encounter it, if we continue to treat racism like it is a giant monster that is chasing us, we will forever be running. But running won't help when it is in our workplace, our government, our homes, and ourselves. So, see you next time for our next episode. Thank you very much. Bye bye.